Good morning. Thank you for joining us at Grace today. My name is Nate Nims. If we haven't met yet, it is good to be with you all today here in the sanctuary, or for everybody joining us online. Thank you for being with us. There was a bulletin in the back that had some information about the service and what's going on at the church. So if you're here with us, hopefully you got one of those for everyone online. That's available at gracedesmoines.org. As we start the service, there are a few announcements to lift up, and one is that the United Methodist Committee on Relief, also known as UMCOR, they are continuing to do their work to help the folks in Ukraine, and if you want to give online to support that work, you can do so. There's a QR code that you can scan on that, or if you give to Grace Online, you can select UMCOR as one of the giving options and support the work that they are doing for refugees and peace in that area. Then our Church and Society Committee is doing a survey right now. For the past few years, when it's come to justice issues that we've worked on as a church, we've talked about gender and sexual orientation equality, about climate change, and about immigration, and these are still important issues to our church, but we want to know more of what other folks are interested in within the church and in the greater community. So we've got a survey that we're hoping folks will take. There are paper copies here at the church if you want to fill one out. There's also a link to it on our website, or you can scan that QR code and fill out this survey. But we want to know, what organizations are you connected with? What work do you care about? What justice needs do you see in the community? Are there gaps that we can help fill as a church to help out and bring about justice? So we hope you'll fill out that survey and let us know. Then want to let you know some very United Methodist Church specific news. So every 4 years in the United Methodist Church, we're supposed to have what's called a general conference. That was supposed to happen in 2020, and of course it was postponed, and then it was postponed again, and then just a little over a week ago, it was postponed one more time until 2024. Now, the biggest reason for the postposal of this meeting is it's going to take place in Minnesota, and right now it takes up to 2 years for someone to get a visa. So in the United Methodist Church, we're global. Delegates come from around the world to be a part of that meeting, and about 30% of them wouldn't be able to come if it was held this year, might not be able to come with visa delays next year as well. So if you're like me and you ever Google United Methodist Church and see what comes up in the news, if you just look up the United Methodist Church right now, the news isn't always that cheerful, because it was announced when the General Conference was delayed that there will be a global Methodist church that is getting started. So there's a group of folks that are currently United Methodist that are planning to leave the United Methodist Church and start their own denomination. So things might get a little messy in the sort of overarching denomination of the Methodist Church right now, and if you want to know more about that, I can tell you all about it. But what I want to say is that the work of our church will continue and will continue to be Grace, even with this postponement. The things that we care about and the things that we contribute to will continue and will remain the church with one another. Also want to say that the flowers that are up here are in memory and from the family of Larry Tukolsky. His service was here at Grace on Thursday, so please continue to keep that family in your prayers with Larry's passing. And then it has just been a week since the tornadoes went through Winterset and affected so many lives. Some of you know Melody Nelson here at the church and the Nelson family. Melody's sister and her family were affected by that storm. Two of the grandchildren passed away. Her sister's brother-in-law passed away. A lot of death affected the Nelson family in this recent week. And so the Open Table, one of the groups that meets during the week, has put together a meal train to help support that family at this time. If you want to know more about that and how you can get involved and help the family through this time, you can contact the church office and we'll get you in touch with Jill, who's organized this meal train for them. There are a few more announcements that you can read about in the bulletin if you're interested, but for now, Bob will lead us in our call to worship.
I invite you to stand as you're able for our call to worship. Cease to do evil, learn to do good. Seek justice, rescue the oppressed. Defend the orphan, plead for the widow. God knows our sins. God offers us forgiveness and restoration. Come, worship our God, who is giving us a fresh start right now. I invite you to join in our opening hymn, Where Charity and Love Prevail, number 549, if you wish to use the hymnal. Please be seated. And I invite you to join both in heart and with voice in our opening prayer. Gracious God, lead us in your ways of love to heal the brokenness in our world. Light the path of righteousness so we might live in right ways that honor our neighbors and the earth you created. Shine your light and love into the cracks of brokenness around us to let your light shine through. Grow your love and light in all of us to be agents of healing and wholeness, to bring change you wish to see in this world. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen. Our scripture lesson this morning is from the Good News according to Luke, the 12th chapter, beginning with verse 22. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Therefore I say to you, don't worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. There is more to life than food, and more to the body than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither plant nor harvest. They have no silo or barn, yet God feeds them. You are worth so much more than birds. Who among you can add a single moment to your life by worrying? If you can't do such a small thing, why worry about the rest? Notice how the lilies grow. They don't wear themselves out with work. They don't spin cloth. But I say to you that even Solomon in all his splendor wasn't dressed like one of these. If God dresses grass in the field so beautifully, even though it's alive today and tomorrow it's thrown into the furnace, how much more will God do for you, you people of weak faith? Don't chase after what you will eat and what you will drink. Stop worrying. All the nations of the world long for these things. Your Father knows that you need them. Instead, desire his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. Don't be afraid, little flock. because your Father delights in giving you the kingdom. Sell all your possessions and give to those in need. Make for yourselves wallets that don't wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never run out. No thief comes near there, and no moth destroys. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be too. May God bless the reading of his word. Amen.
So we are in the season of Lent, and my guess is that some of you might have given up something related for food if you're in the Lenten sort of practice of giving things up. And did anyone give up soda? I know one of our high school kids did. We were working together on the dinner drama, and they were debating whether or not they could drink a sparkling water, if that counted. Or some folks have given up chocolate for Lent. I did that in the past once. I gave up coffee for Lent once. That was terrible because fasting is supposed to make you a better person. And when I gave up coffee, it made me worse. It was just not the best thing. When I was in seminary, going to graduate school to study to be a pastor, my roommates and I, we decided that we were going to do rice and beans for Lent. So all we ate was rice and beans with a few other things mixed in, and it was terrible. It was very, very humbling. Like a majority of people in the world live on a diet that is very similar to rice and beans, and as much as we tried to enjoy it, it got old fast. So I've stopped giving up foods for Lent, and as we talk about gluttony, I'm going to cook fajitas because I skipped breakfast this morning and I'm hungry. And hopefully after the service, some of you can join me for fajitas as well. So in the 18th century, there was a Chinese poet named Yan Mei who wrote, "In no department of life, in no place should indifference be allowed to creep, especially in the domain of cookery." There should be no indifference to how we cook or what we eat, but how often are we indifferent about the foods that we have? Now, during this season of Lent, we're looking at the 7 deadly sins. The 7 deadly sins are different sort of habits of the heart. They are different routines that people get stuck into. There are different ways of just sort of getting used to things. Like if you cut a red pepper, you probably have a way that you are used to doing it, a certain way and habit and routine of trying to get it done. It's just a habit. After you do it for a while, it becomes how you do it, and it's just how you do it. The same thing is true with our lives and our sort of values and virtues. There are certain ways that we do things. They become a ritual, they become a routine, they become a habit, and that's just life. So the 7 deadly sins were developed in the ancient church to talk about these habits of the heart, these routines that we get stuck in, and ask ourselves, are we doing things the right way, or could we rethink these things a little bit? Could we reconsider and reorient our lives in a better way? So the tradition of Lent dates back to about the 2nd and 3rd century of the church. And when people were getting ready to join the church, getting ready to join a Christian community, they were asked to take these 6 weeks of Lent and do some introspection, to ask themselves, are there better ways that we can orient our lives? Are there other things that we can do that would be better and healthier for us and for one another and for the world that we find ourselves in? And that's where this practice of Lent comes from. Now, gluttony is about food, but gluttony is about more than food, because food is not just vitamins and minerals. Food is not just what you eat for sustenance to fill your stomach. Food is an essential element to our lives. It is something that speaks deeply to our souls. Now, if you have ever been to Grace before or heard me speak, there's a good chance you've heard me quote something from Genesis chapters 1 and 2. I tend to go back to the beginning of the scriptures quite a bit, because in Genesis 1 and 2, there's this poetry, and there's this sort of story of creation happening in a good and glorious way. And in Genesis 1 and 2, food is created not as an afterthought. Food is there from the beginning. In the beginning, there is this good gift from God, and food is God's love made delectable in the early scriptures. It is this thing to be celebrated and cherished. It is this sort of symbolic representation of God's grace given to us. Food is a sign and a symbol of good news, and yet we can become indifferent about it. We can just start to think that food is food, and that's just how it is. One of my favorite authors of food is Norman Wurzaba. He's a professor at Duke Theological Seminary, and he writes about food and theology. And he wrote in his book, Food and Faith, that created life is God's love made tasteable. It is God's love made tangible. It is God's love made deliciously. And it is a daily invitation for us to live responsibly with God and with one another. It summons to us to commune with the divine life that is presupposed and made manifest in every bite. I love that last line. Manifest in every bite is this love of God. Manifest in every bite is this promise and this symbol of our daily bread. But sometimes we just rush from one thing to another. In the Psalms, one of the psalmists says, "Taste and see that the Lord is good." But sometimes we don't taste and see that God is good because when we want to take that daily bite, when we go for our daily bread, that sort of inner flesh of the pepper gets in the way, and that just doesn't taste very good. So we get distracted, we get annoyed, and we sort of lose track of the goodness, and we get stuck into a different kind of gluttony that takes away the hope and the promise that we were longing for in the first place. Food is this symbolic good gift of God's love made manifest, and there is a reminder in every meal. We don't like to think about it, maybe we don't always like to admit it, but there's a reminder in every meal. And that reminder is, you are mortal, and you are not self-sufficient. If you were immortal, and if you were self-sufficient, you would not need to eat. You would not need this nutrition that is beyond you to come into you and to sustain you. We have to eat because we can't sustain ourselves alone. We are interconnected into this world. It is a reminder of every bite. We're mortal, we're temporary, and we are connected to one another. So with that, there can come gratitude and thanks, but there can also come indifference. The great chef and teacher Julia Child once said, "The people who love to eat are the best people." And I'm a big fan of that quote because it means I am amazing. Right? The people that love to eat are the best kinds of people because food, it is central to our lives and yet something that we take for granted. We can love and cherish it, or we can just have a Reese's at the checkout line because it was there and we were a little bit hungry. Food is this symbol of gratitude and thanks, and it is nutrition, but we know if we just had nutrition, life would be very boring and incomplete. Food is memorable. How many of you have a meal from your childhood that you can still just sort of taste? Like, did anybody have like their grandmother's cookie recipe? And you can smell it right now because I said grandmother's cookie recipe. Right? Sunday night for my family growing up was pizza night. And for a long time, my mom would make her own pizza dough. And I can still sort of remember the smell in our house on Sunday afternoons of that yeast and pizza dough starting to rise and working together, right? Food is memorable and connected to us. Food is ethical because it comes from different places and comes to us in different ways. Food is personal. Food is a public health issue. Food is all sorts of things and not just food. Now, with that, I want to say that hopefully, at its best, the church is a place without shame, that we are not here to sort of beat one another up, even as we talk about guilt. But Have you ever had something in your fridge and it just got tucked into a back corner and you forgot about it, and then something else got put in front of it, and then one day you open your refrigerator and you take a sniff and you wonder, I didn't think I had cheese in here, especially a French stinky cheese, right? Like, there are ways that produce becomes something other than produce because all of a sudden it is covered with slime and starts to smell. Now, we all know how bad one of these peppers could taste if it starts to get moldy in the back of your fridge. It just sort of slimes over, it grows a fuzz, and it stinks, right? Like, it smells like it ruins everything in your refrigerator. In the United States, we throw away 40% of our food. If you want to think about gluttony, think about the food waste that we have in the United States. 40% of all of our food goes to waste. We throw away more food in the United States than some other countries import to sustain their communities. So if we know how bad one of these peppers will stink if it starts to rot, why doesn't the rest of the world smell like that rotting pepper? If we throw away 40% of our produce and food, if we toss out so much stuff, why does the world not stink? Has that thought ever crossed your mind, or am I the only person that's a little bit odd? Here's the thing. There is a universal principle in life of death being a precondition for new life. Something has to die for something new to be created. That's within us. Like, the elements that are within you are made from dead stars billions of years ago. The seeds in this plant could never develop unless it died and passed them on. Death is a precondition for life, and we can see that in every meal because when you eat, you take in some dead material so that you can live. Life as we know it depends on death. And gardeners, you know this as well. Some of the best compost comes from that dead material, and it is just about spring, right? Like, we are on the edge, and knock on wood, we've made it over the hump, right? Like, it was 18 degrees out yesterday. Today it's going to be in the 50s. Tomorrow it could snow. Who knows, right? It's Iowa in March. We're all over the place. But I've got, Irene and I in our backyard have some irises, and they are just starting to poke through. And I am so excited because it means it's not the end of the world. Right? I am a terrible gardener, but I know what I like, and I know how to kind of help it grow. So every now and then we put down a little bit of compost there to help take care of things because that dead material needs to be there so that new life can spring forth and be found. Now, gluttony, this different sort of use with food, it is tricky because it's not just a matter of our souls, it's related to our stomachs, our habits, our routines. Where do we find comfort? Where do we look for solace? Where do we find our peace? Do we eat to embrace and enhance this life, or do we eat to ignore it and run away? Now, I was writing part of this sermon at home, and we have a 90-pound puppy named Oates. And Oates is a reactive dog, which is fun because she's about as long as this table, but if there's a squirrel in the front yard, it feels like she's going to break through the glass and chase it down. Like, the smallest thing just sets her off. So we have to keep her on a tight leash. And Oates does not like being on a leash. So I was writing this sermon, and it was getting ready for the time where Oates needed to go to her kennel and take a nap. Because our puppy Oates will not sleep anywhere except her kennel. Like, she's kennel trained, that's her safe place. It's the only place she will fall asleep. And we know if she stays up too long, our grumpy dog will get grumpier. So it came time for Oates to go upstairs. I grabbed her leash to take her outside and then take her back to her kennel. And Oates has this thing of running around a table in a circle. And I just follow her, and she keeps running away from me in a circle around the table. and we have this little game that we play with one another. And Oates trained me to know that I have to give her a treat so she can come to me so I can put the leash on her to take her to the kennel. Like, we train dogs, but they also have a way of training us. So now, every time Oates goes to her kennel, I have to give her at least one, if not multiple treats. And I realized something in that moment is that Oates doesn't really like going to her kennel. She wants a snack. She loves blueberry greenies. It is her favorite treat of any dog treat. Highly recommended. They're on sale at Target right now, too. So Oates loves blueberry greenies, and she needs one to go up to the kennel. And I realized in writing the sermon this week that I am the same as my dog. Because Oates needs that treat to be able to go upstairs, and I had spent all week putting off an email. All I needed to do was send people minutes from a meeting and remind them of when we were meeting again. Sending an email might have taken like 3 minutes. But because it was so small, because it was so simple, I just kept pushing it back. And eventually I told myself, well, if I have some crackers and cheese, then I can send this email. I realized I have trained myself in the same way that I have trained this dog to see food as a reward, as this gift that comes to motivate you to get something done. That's a different sort of part of this life. Now, you've probably heard the phrase, we are what we eat. And in a way, that is very true. You are what you eat. You can, interesting fact, if you're ever at a party and you're not sure what to say for small talk, you can throw this out there. Did you know that there is corn in your hair? Yeah. Because corn syrup is in so many items, you can find corn in your hair. Interesting fact, don't know if you'll ever have to use that in small conversation, but it's true. We are what we eat. Now, Frederick Buechner was a priest and an author, did a lot of amazing things, and they write about gluttony that a glutton is one who raids the icebox to cure their spiritual malnutrition. Now, it's not that eating is bad. It's not that food is bad. Food is a good gift from God, given out of grace and hope and peace and promise. This good gift of creation is there to support us and help us and guide us, and yet we can use it in ways that are abused. We can take this goodness and twist it into something bad. That's the problem at the core of the 7 deadly sins. There is something good, and we use it in a bad way. Right? Food can become a weapon of shame. Food can be something that we beat ourselves up with and we beat up one another with. We can get shamed into. And who grew up at the kind of table where you had to clean your plate no matter what? Right? It creates sort of an imprint on your mind that if you don't eat it all, yeah, right? It creates this sort of different cycle of shame. But then there are other folks that might have grown up with the shame of, I don't know if I can eat anything off of this because I don't know who's watching what I fit into. I don't know who's watching my weight. I don't know if I'm watching my own weight and I'm content with this. And so it becomes a weapon of shame. And culturally and scientifically, we are all over the place with food and shame. Like who, in the 90s, does anyone remember when eggs were evil? Right? Like it seemed to be on the news all the time that eggs were just sort of the worst thing that you could have. But is it true? Or the way that popular diets come and go. Right now there are some folks that I see online that are pushing the carnivore diet. There's this, if anybody's on TikTok, there's somebody that shows up all the time, at least on me. He's called the Liver King. And he's this massively built bodybuilder that says you should eat liver with every meal. And that you should eat, like, no plants because cavemen didn't eat plants. I don't trust the Liver King's diet, and I just don't like liver that much either. But he is out there pushing that diet and that plan as scientifically sound. There are all sorts of things that we use with food and shame. There are all sorts of ways that we abuse and shame one another and ourselves with food, and that becomes another sign and symbol of gluttony among us. It's sort of like, so this is a jalapeno. This is not as spicy as this, right? It's that small seed that has all the capsaicin in it, and that's the chemical that gets stuck to your tongue that makes you want to cry, right? Like that seed is what holds all of that capsaicin, or at least the majority of it. And in food, we can take all of the goodness, all the stuff that we need of it, that we want to share with one another, that we want to use to celebrate, to have a good time, even just to eat something and relax. But we can take that one small seed and just twist it and abuse ourselves or one another with this guilt and shame. Now, Jesus says in our reading today, don't worry about your life. And every time I hear Jesus say that in the Gospels, I want to say, that's good for you. But do you know what we're going through right now? Like, Jesus says, don't worry about your life. And I think, I'm worried every day. Is the CDC guidance going to be updated again? Are we going to have to go into another shutdown? I know things look peaceful and calm now, but how long is this going to last? But Jesus says, don't worry about your life, about what you will eat or about your body, what you will wear. Isn't there more to life than food, and the body more than clothing? Consider the ravens of the field. They neither plant nor sow or harvest. They don't have a silo or a barn, and yet God takes care of them. Won't God do more for you? You can't add a single hour to your life with worry. Jesus says, don't worry. But we worry. And so we find ourselves in these different habits and routines and can sometimes use food as a symbol of our worry or as a sign of how we're in control. Now, in life, we don't want to always admit that we are not in complete control. There are things that are completely beyond our control. There's a lot that we are not in control of. So we can take this food and say, I know exactly how to manipulate this, how to control this, how to do something with it. I will be in control of this and my body. Gluttony is often a sign of that control, a sign of puffing ourselves up. That's often the core of the 7 deadly sins, trying to be in control. I came really worried about slicing my finger. I didn't. But those chops got a little loud because I think this knife is starting to get dull, which means I need to sharpen it, right? Right? We have these ways of putting ourselves in control of our environments when we are not really completely in control. But Jesus says, don't chase after what you will eat or what you will drink. Stop worrying, for the nations worry about these things, and God knows your desires, and God will take care of you. So, the last time that you had something to eat, did you pause to think about where it came from, how it got to your table, what happened for that food to find its way to your plate? How long did you sort of savor and consider all that needed to happen for that moment to come to you? Did you savor each bite, or did you just rush through it to the next thing? In the United States, 37% of us eat fast food at least once a day. Now, I have nothing against fast food. I am a bit of I would call myself a foodie. I love fancy food. I get really snobby about what I eat sometimes, but I will admit that there is probably no sandwich as perfect as the McChicken. It is one of my favorite things to eat. It is just delicious. There is something about the ratio to mayo and fried chicken that makes that just Oh, the perfect sandwich, right? Like 37% of us eat a fast food meal at least once a day. And part of it is because eating out right now could be cheaper than buying groceries, right? With inflation and everything else, going to the grocery store gets a lot more expensive than a dollar menu. So that's a significant portion of why some of us eat out so often, but there's also the reality that our schedules have become gluttonous as well. Right? We think about gluttony related to food, but have you thought about the gluttony of your schedule? How you are always trying to find room for more and more and more. Or maybe if your work switched to being online, how many of us have gotten used to meetings on Zoom that are now back to back? Oh my gosh, why did we think that was a good idea? Right? We don't even give ourselves sometimes like a 5-minute break between meetings because it's all online, so you don't have to commute. You clearly don't need a break to go to the bathroom or get a cup of coffee. You can just fill in your schedule more and more and more, and it becomes gluttonous, overwhelmed and overwhelming, stuffed to the brim, and you don't know what to do with it, and so we end up going out to eat and going through the drive-thru because we don't have time to eat in the first place. We get so caught up with everything that we tell ourselves we have to do that we don't start to ask ourselves what truly is mine to do. Jesus says the ravens in the field, they don't reap or sow, they don't have barns or silos, they don't harvest, they don't plant, and yet God takes care of that. God takes care of these birds of the air, so what about you? Will you trust that God will take care of you even if you harvest and have a silo and barn? Will you trust that God will take care of you in the midst of your busyness and schedule? Can you let yourself relax and, like the ravens of the sky, look upon creation and just enjoy it for a moment? Maybe that's what you need to do this Sunday afternoon. Enjoy. Because ravens don't rush around thinking about their 401k. They don't worry about all the yard work that needs to get done as we're just on the edge of spring. They aren't thinking about the hour of lost sleep that they got last night. Ravens simply exist and take in this creation and share it back with God. So maybe you could do that. Or maybe you can stick around after the service, and if all goes well, fajitas in about 10 minutes. That's what I'm hoping for, right? So, since we're having fajitas, I was thinking about gluttony, and I was thinking about Mexican restaurants. Because one of my favorite things about Mexican restaurants is the bowl of chips that they automatically bring out to you. Now, if you go out to eat at a Mexican restaurant and you have friends with you or you're there with family, think about what happens when it gets down to the final few chips in the bowl. And then there's that one chip that is remaining. Are you the kind of person that grabs it right away, or do you look around the table to see who are you going to play chicken with? Right? If you are not the person that looks around the table, you are probably the person that steals it right away. So good for you. But the thing about stealing it right away is typically at most places that give you chips and dip, as soon as they see that bowl is empty, they bring you another one. But in that moment where the bowl is empty, there's this small bit of panic. We think to ourselves, there's not enough to go around, so let's see what happens and hope I get mine even if they can't get theirs. Or hopefully sometime soon, even this spring, we will do a church potluck. I miss potlucks. I miss salads that have candy bars in them, right? Like for some reason, churches think, of course, it wouldn't be a salad if it wasn't filled with marshmallow fluff. And of course, a salad has to be topped with chopped up ramen noodles. There are so many odd but amazing church salads that I have not had for 2 years, and so maybe we'll just have a church salad potluck someday. But if you ever go through a potluck, and my church potluck food of choice beyond the salads is deviled eggs. Those are my favorites. Whenever I see them out anywhere, I think to myself, I will just put my plate down and pick up that plate and take it with me. And that's often what happens at church potlucks. You are going through the line, and then you look back and see how long it is, and you think to yourself, well, I could come back through another time, but I need to get mine now, so too bad for who was ever behind me. Too often we live as if there is not enough to go around, that we can't really trust one another with our limited resources, even though there is a lot more to go around than we want to admit. There are all sorts of ways that we are gluttonous with our time, with our energy, with our schedules. We just take in more and more and more at the expense of others so that we can be in control of ourselves, even if it means they can't do anything. So what do we do with this gluttony? Do we continue to hoard and store things up, or do we, as Jesus seems to suggest, celebrate and cherish and even sometimes fast? Now, it's interesting in the Gospels how Jesus deals with food, because often Jesus eats with folks. Jesus goes to a lot of parties. There's passages where it's written about Jesus eating and drinking with sinners and tax collectors and street workers, that Jesus is at all of these festivities. And maybe the most well-known example of that is Jesus at the wedding of Cana. There's this wedding celebration early in the Gospel of John. Jesus shows up to the wedding ceremony, and then one of the folks comes to Jesus and says, "Jesus, we ran out of wine." And in the ancient Near East, when you ran out of wine at a wedding, it was usually a multiple-day affair. It wasn't just the reception dinner afterwards. And so they run up to Jesus and they say they ran out of wine, which is their way of saying, the party's over, it's time for everybody to go home. But Jesus has a servant go and bring out some stone jars and fill them with water. They fill them to the brim, and then those jars overflow with wine. They give that wine to the steward, to sort of the main host of that wedding party. And this is one of the fun little stories of the Bible, because the wedding steward says to Jesus and says to the servant that brought it to them, typically people serve the best wine early, and then they bring out the swill afterwards when everyone has had enough to drink, because your taste buds sort of decline with alcohol usage. But Jesus, in this moment, doesn't want the party to end. The celebration is supposed to continue. There are times where we need to use food to celebrate with one another. There are times where we need to have this goodness and this gift and this reminder and this symbol of love among us. So food is not always something that we need to be absolutely ascetic with. There is a long Christian tradition of folks having almost nothing to do with pleasure and joy. The early desert fathers and mothers who came up with the 7 deadly sins, they were often living in isolation, fasting all the time, eating next to nothing. But Jesus says food is a good gift from God. And later in one of the other Gospels, after the resurrection, there's a moment where Jesus is having fish on the beach. Jesus shares this breakfast on the beach with his disciples, this meal that reminds them and us that food is this good gift. And at the very end of Jesus' life, Jesus gave the disciples a meal. So just before the crucifixion, Jesus in the Gospel of John tells them, "Love one another as I have loved you." Jesus goes through this farewell discourse, telling them all the important things that they really need to remember. Jesus tells them to wash one another's feet, for example, to be servants and caretakers of one another, that they need to love each other, that they need to forgive one another, and to sum everything up, Jesus and the disciples share a meal. Now, they share the Passover meal, which was this meal of remembering the liberation that God gave to the people that brought them out of Egypt. But Jesus adds to this liberation the reminder that he will be with us. Jesus says, "Do this in remembrance of me." So when you eat, when you gather around the table, Jesus breaks bread, gives thanks to God, shares it with those that are around them, and says, "This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And so with our lives and with our tables, we unite our hearts with Christ in that same service, or at least we should strive to. And then Jesus takes the cup, gives thanks to God, gives it to his disciples, and said, "Take, eat, all of you. This is my blood poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. Do this as often as you drink of it in remembrance of me." In the Gospels, when Jesus is summing everything up, when he is having his last meal with the disciples, the final thing that he gives to them is that meal. It's not a list of rules and regulations. Jesus doesn't give them policies or procedures to follow. Jesus says, "Do this in remembrance of me." Have a meal with one another. Have this table where everyone is welcome. Have this time where you can all come together for grace and peace. Jesus gives the disciples a meal, and Jesus gives to us this meal as well, where we can remember, where we can come together, where we can give love and service to one another. The author Shauna Nyquist has a memoir and cookbook called Bread and Wine. And in this cookbook, she writes, "To those of us who believe that all of life is sacred, and that every crumb of bread and every sip of wine is a Eucharist, a remembrance, a call to holiness right here and right now that spills beyond the church walls, out of the hands of priests and into the regular people on regular streets and sidewalks, into the hands of us, as grubby as they may be, onto our tables, in our kitchens, in our dining rooms, and in our backyards. That everything might be a Eucharist, a sign and a symbol of God's love with us." So we have this good gift of food, but what do we do with it? Do we do with it things that build ourselves up, that puff ourselves up? Or do we have food that feeds not only our bodies, but our spirits? Gluttony ultimately is about this excess, this push for more and more and more, filling ourselves to the brim and then overflowing with more than we need. But what if we didn't do that with food? What if instead we did that with what Christ says at the Last Supper? "Do this in remembrance of me. Do this in remembrance of the love that I've shared with you, with the service that I am providing you. Do this in remembrance of me." Draw one another together with these signs and symbols of grace and peace. Share a meal and have an extra seat at the table so if Judas shows up, Judas knows they can eat too. That is what it means, in a way, to rise above this gluttony. It might get a little smoky. What could it be if we share this communion table with one another at our own tables, at the spaces and places, even in the fast food line, where we saw food as a sign and symbol of God's love made delectable? Food is a habit of the heart. That's all the 7 deadly sins. There are habits and routines that we have with food, and that's okay. But as you think about gluttony, and what I kind of tried to do with this sermon was just sort of be gluttonous with ideas. So hopefully you can take one that sticks. Because I don't know if we can really solve gluttony, but we can be a little more mindful about it. We can be a little more thoughtful about what we eat, how we eat, and who we eat with. We can taste and see that God is good. God's love made delectable is each meal that we have. So will we use what we have to share this grace and peace, or will we just engorge ourselves? That's kind of the question. And then the other question for you that I have today is based on what they do at Chili's restaurants. So at Chili's, whenever anyone orders a fajita, they always start making 2 or 3 more in the kitchen. And they do that because they know as soon as they take a fajita out into the restaurant and people hear it sizzling and start to smell it pass by, If they haven't ordered their meal yet, they're probably going to think to themselves, I want a fajita. I want a fajita right now. I don't know about you, but I want a fajita. And even more than that, I want a way of life that reflects Jesus' hope from the Gospel of Luke, where we can look at the birds of the sky and we can look at the ravens of the field and we can say, I want to live like that. I want a life that is free of worries and anxieties, or at the very least, I want a life where in the midst of my worries and anxieties, I can trust that God is there to take care of me and it'll be okay. I want that kind of life. I want that kind of hope. I want that kind of freedom. And so, in our life with one another, how can we live in a way where we're like that fajita? We are like this plate that goes sizzling out into the restaurant where others see it and think, I want a little bit of that. I want something that is brimming with goodness and grace, not only for itself, but in a way that can be shared and passed on and given to others as a good gift. So this is going to sizzle for a little while. And as it does, we're going to have a time of offering with one another. And in the Christian tradition, the offering is part of the financial gifts that we give to the church, part of the ways that we support the church, part of the ways that you make meals happen here at the church. Every Tuesday, we have a free clinic meal that is made possible thanks to your donations. The first of the month, every month, we have a meal that goes to the Central Iowa shelters, and we try to make those meals as good as they can be for the folks that interact with them, to share this goodness and grace as a sign of God's love made delectable. So we have that offering that you can support the financial work of the church with in that way. But your offering this week is also just a sign of the goodness that you want to share with one another. So how can you be like one of those ravens in the sky that doesn't have to reap or sow? How can you, as Jesus inspires us to, relax, take a step back, trust that we'll all be okay, and know that God is watching over you? So as Cheryl sings Just a Closer Walk with Thee, may you take some time to think about how you can walk closer to Christ this week. How can you use food as a gift to share with others, not only for your own goodness and grace, but as a witness to what Jesus did at this table that invites everyone to come forward and receive it? So we'll have this time of offering and music, and then we'll sing, and then we'll have fajitas.
daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be.
Our closing hymn this morning is hymn number 399 in the red hymnals. It'll also be on the screen, but we'll join together in singing Take My Life and Let It Be, number 399 in the red hymnals and up on the screen. And I invite you to rise in body or in spirit as we join together in this song. For everyone online that's with us today, I owe you a fajita. So get in touch. I'll send you a gift card or take you out to eat. For you all that are with us, if you would like some food, the first batch is almost done. Second batch will be done in a little bit. There's coffee, and Bob brought brownies as well, so you can have a snack as you wait for a fajita if you want. But this closing hymn sort of speaks to the cure of gluttony, that we might see ourselves as consecrated, as gifts that are meant to share our gifts with others, that instead of hoarding and bringing in more to ourselves, we can see ourselves as a fount of goodness that has more to share with others, so that we might remember what Christ said at his final meal, at this meal that has been given to us as a celebration where we might love one another as he has loved us, where we might serve one another as he has served us, where we can see this meal and this time at the table as a gift, as a means of grace that connects us with one another and with God. So may you be gluttonous with love this week. May you abound with that love wherever you go. And when you come to the table, remember the holiness that it represents, and then share that love with others. Go in peace. Amen.